The October wind off Lake Erie had dropped Erie, Pennsylvania to 38 degrees by 7 in the morning, and Staff Sergeant Daniel Voss was 3 blocks from his apartment when Chief stopped walking. Not slowed. Stopped. All 4 paws planted. Head down, a sound building in his chest that Daniel had learned, over 4 years and 2 deployments, to treat as information rather than noise. Across the street, outside the side entrance of the Millbrook Community Center, an elderly woman in a tan cardigan was being turned away at the door by a man in a staff polo shirt, her arms full of papers, her voice rising in a way that suggested she had been turned away before and did not intend to accept it quietly this time. What that Marine uncovered when he crossed that street would surface a story that had been called a lie for 14 months by people who should have known better, and prove in the end that the only thing more dangerous than a woman with the truth was a Marine with a phone and a reason to use it. If stories about people who refuse to stop fighting, and the few who choose to stand beside them, matter to you, subscribe before we go further. This channel exists because some stories deserve a witness. Daniel Voss had joined the Marines at 22, which everyone in his family said was too late, and which turned out to be exactly right. He had grown up in Erie, second of 3 boys, father on the docks, mother managing a dental office, and had spent 2 years in community college studying criminal justice before he understood that he was near the idea of it, not the thing itself. What he wanted was to do something that mattered before he was old enough to be comfortable. 8 years of service, 2 tours in Helmand, 1 in Djibouti. He was 34 now, working as an investigator for a legal aid organization in Erie that took civil cases for people who couldn't afford the other kind. Slower work than anything he had done before, and more permanent in its consequences, which suited him. He lived 12 minutes from his mother. Breakfast on Sundays. He fixed things when they broke without being asked, which was the form his affection took, and she accepted it without commentary, which was the form hers took. Chief was a Dutch shepherd, 6 years old, brindle-coated and compact, with amber eyes that gave him an expression of perpetual mild skepticism. He had been a military working dog, patrol and detection, before a training injury ended his service life, and he had come to Daniel through the standard placement program after an assessment the coordinator called uneventful, which was how she described pairings so clearly correct they required no documentation of difficulty. Chief had walked into Daniel's apartment, assessed the space, assessed Daniel, and gone to lie in the strip of sunlight by the kitchen window with the settled air of something that had found what it was looking for. He was not a demonstrative dog. What he did, on the nights Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a case file open and the stillness that came from reading about things done to people who deserved better. On those nights, Chief put his chin on the edge of the table at Daniel's eye level and looked at him steadily until Daniel acknowledged him. Not comfort. Witness, they had been walking the 4-block loop that began Daniel's morning since the first week Chief came home. They had walked it in January ice and August heat and every weather Erie placed between them. Chief had never stopped in the middle of it before. Daniel crossed the street. The man in the polo shirt was named, according to the laminated badge on his chest, Gary. He had the bearing of someone exercising authority he had been given recently and had not yet learned to hold lightly. He was speaking to the elderly woman in the slow, loud register that people sometimes use with the very old, as though age were a form of hearing loss that required volume rather than patience. "Ma'am, I've explained this. The Community Liaison Director has reviewed your situation and determined there's nothing further the center can do. If you'd like to file another request, I have filed 7 requests," the woman said. "I have the receipts for all 7. She held up the papers in her arms. They were not disorganized. They were not the papers of someone confused or irrational. They were clipped and tabbed and ordered with a precision that suggested she had been building a case for a long time and had learned, somewhere along the way, that people would use disorder against her if she gave them the chance. Gary said, "Ma'am." Chief pulled toward the woman without command, not aggressively. Deliberately, he walked to her left side, sat down, and looked at Gary with the amber-eyed skepticism he reserved for things he had assessed as problems. The woman looked down at Chief. Then, she looked at Daniel. "Is that your dog?" she said. "He is," Daniel said. He looked at Gary. "What's the issue?" Gary straightened slightly. "Sir, this is a community center matter. If you're not a resident, I live on Hartfield," Daniel said. 3 blocks. He looked at the woman. "What's your name?" She held herself up in the particular way of someone who has been told repeatedly that their posture is all they have left to argue with. "Estelle Marsh," she said. "I am 77 years old, and I have been trying to speak to someone at this building for 14 months, and every time I come here they tell me to file a form. And every time I file a form, they tell me someone will be in touch, and nobody is ever in touch." Daniel said, "What happened 14 months ago?" Estelle Marsh looked at him for a moment. The careful look of a woman who had learned that talking brought consequences and silence brought different consequences, and was weighing which she could afford. Then she looked at Gary. Then she looked back at Daniel. "My car," she said, "and my savings, and a man who told me he was going to help." Her name was Estelle Marsh, and she was 77 years old, and she had lived in Erie, Pennsylvania for 51 of those years, arriving from Youngstown in 1973 with a teaching certificate and a suitcase, and the practical confidence of a woman who had grown up the eldest of 5 children in a household that ran on competence rather than comfort. She had taught 5th grade at Garrison Elementary for 29 years. She was the kind of teacher students came back to visit. Not the dramatic ones, but the ones whose classrooms felt like places where something real was expected of you, and you found out you were capable of it. She had a habit of writing a single word on each student's desk on the first day of class, chosen specifically for that child. The word stayed all year. Former students, decades later, could still tell you what theirs had been. Her husband, Charles, had been an electrician and a deacon at Greater Zion Baptist Church on State Street, and they had been married 4 years before he died in 2019 of a heart attack in the driveway, the kind of death that gives you no time to say what you needed to say. She still set his coffee cup on the counter every morning and put it away without filling it, which was the closest thing she had to a ritual for missing him. She had been careful with money her entire life. That was the thing that mattered about what came next. She was not a woman who made foolish decisions with money. She had a savings account and a pension and a paid-off house on Dunmore Street that Charles had insisted they buy rather than rent. Because, he said, the world would always try to take things from you, and the best defense was to own what mattered. She had kept all of it intact for 4 years after his death. She had been, by any reasonable accounting, fine. The man's name was Warren Stoll. He had come to her door 14 months ago with a card from a home repair company and a story about a program for seniors in Erie County that covered exterior maintenance, gutters, siding, small roof repairs, at reduced cost, with financing available for anything larger. He had been pleasant. He had known the names of other families on the street. He had shown her photographs of completed work. She had let him assess the house, because the gutters were failing, and she had been meaning to address them for 2 years, and this seemed, as these things sometimes do, like the right moment for the right solution to arrive. The contract he put in front of her was 14 pages. She had read it. She had asked questions. He had answered them. She had signed. 3 weeks later, Warren Stoll's company had done 4 days of work on the house. Superficial work, she would later understand, work that looked like repairs and addressed nothing structural, and presented her with a final invoice that was $11,000 more than the contract had specified, citing materials cost increases, scope changes, and a clause on page 9 that she had read but had not fully understood until a lawyer at a legal aid clinic explained it to her 6 months later. When she called Warren Stoll to dispute it, he had stopped returning her calls. When she contacted the company, she discovered the company had been dissolved 2 weeks after the work was completed. The financing she had agreed to, which she had believed was a county program, was a private loan at 19% interest attached to her house as collateral. She had gone to the community center because it was where the county senior services office had its satellite desk. She had gone 7 times. She had been told 7 times in various forms of official language that the contract she had signed was legally binding, that the terms had been disclosed, that there was no evidence of fraud, that if she wanted to pursue the matter further, she would need to consult an attorney. She did not have money for an attorney. The legal aid clinic she had found had told her case had merit, but that their caseload was full and they could not take it on. She had kept every document. She had kept every receipt. She had filed every form. She had been turned away by every door she had tried. "How much did you pay him?" Daniel said. $14,260, Estelle said. She said it the way she said everything, precisely, without flinching. "My savings, plus the loan payments since. I've paid back $9,000 of the loan, but the interest, it keeps." She stopped. She pressed her lips together. "I know how it sounds. I know people hear it and think I should have known better." Daniel looked at the papers in her arms. He looked at Chief, who was still sitting at Estelle's left side, not having moved since he sat down, his amber eyes tracking Gary with quiet, continuous assessment. "Can I see the contract?" Daniel said. "Have you ever known someone like Estelle? Someone who did everything right? Who read the paperwork, who asked the questions, and still got taken? Someone who fought back and kept hitting the same wall? If that person is still fighting, tell them they're not alone. And if you're thinking of someone who gave up, tell me about them in the comments. They deserve to have someone still angry on their behalf." He read the contract standing on the sidewalk, Chief leaning against his left leg, Estelle watching his face. He had read a lot of contracts in his 2 years at the legal aid organization. He knew what legitimate residential service agreements looked like, and he knew what this was. The materials escalation clause on page 9 was real and had been disclosed, technically, but the financing addendum on page 12, which had been formatted to look like a continuation of the main contract rather than a separate instrument, contained a property lien provision that the contract's main body made no reference to. The 2 documents had been designed to be read as one, so that the most consequential sentence, the one that attached her house to the debt, arrived deep in language that looked like boilerplate. He had seen this before. Not this company, not this name, but this architecture. The same structure in 3 other cases that had come through his office, 2 of which had been dismissed before anyone had thought to cross-reference them. He took out his phone. He photographed every page of the contract. He photographed the company name, the license number in the header, and the financing entity named in the addendum. He opened the state contractor licensing database and searched the license number. The license had been issued to a company called Lakeshore Home Services. It had been suspended 8 months ago for failure to maintain bonding requirements. The company that had done Estelle's work, listed on the contract as Lakeshore Home Improvements, was a different entity. 1 letter different, with a different filing date and a different registered agent. The same registered agent's name appeared on both. He searched the financing entity. It was registered in Delaware, 2 years old. One officer listed. He searched that officer's name combined with the word contractor and the state of Pennsylvania. The results came back in 11 seconds. Warren Stoll had operated under 6 business names in 4 states over 9 years. He had 41 complaints filed with various state contractor licensing boards. He had 2 civil judgments against him in Ohio, 1 in West Virginia. He was currently listed as a defendant in a class action in Allegheny County involving 18 complainants. The suit had been filed 4 months ago and had not yet been publicized outside legal filings. 18 complainants. And the class action attorneys were looking for more. Daniel looked up from his phone. He looked at Estelle Marsh, who was standing on the sidewalk in the October cold in her tan cardigan, holding 14 months of documents that nobody had believed. And he felt something that he had learned across 4 years of reading case files to treat as information rather than feeling. The specific clarity that came when you understood exactly what had happened and exactly what needed to happen next. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I need you to answer it the same way you've answered everything else, precisely, without leaving anything out." Estelle said, "That's the only way I know how to answer. Is there anyone else on your street or anyone you know who used this company?" Estelle was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Margaret Tolliver. Number 412. And I believe the Hendersons on the corner, but I don't know their first names well enough to say for certain. 3 properties, possibly 4. On one street. That evening, a silver Chevy pickup parked at the end of Dunmore Street sat there for 2 hours without moving, the engine running. Daniel walked past it twice from different directions. The third time, it was gone. He noted the plate. He sent it to a contact at the Erie PD with whom he had worked on 2 previous cases. A detective named Sandra Vukovic, who texted back in 40 minutes. The plate was registered to a leasing company whose customer list she was not able to access without a warrant, but whose pattern of registration she had seen in connection with 2 prior fraud investigations. If you were in Daniel Voss's position right now, you have the contract, you have the search results, you have 17 other victims in a county filing you weren't supposed to find yet. What would you do? Type yes or no in the comments. Would you go the rest of the way? He already had his answer. He'd had it since Chief stopped walking. He called the lead attorney on the Allegheny County class action at 8:45 that evening. Her name was Patricia Osei, and she answered on the first ring the way attorneys answer when they are still at their desks at 8:45 in the evening because they are working on something that matters. He told her about Estelle Marsh and Margaret Tolliver and the Hendersons on the corner. He told her about the registered agent common to both company filings. He told her about the suspended license and the name variation. Patricia Osei was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then, she said, "How fast can you get me the contract documents?" He had already photographed every page. Patricia Osei drove up from Pittsburgh on a Thursday morning with a paralegal and a box of legal pads. She spent 2 hours with Estelle at the kitchen table of the house on Dunmore Street and another hour with Margaret Tolliver at number 412, who had a similar contract, a similar financing addendum, and a similar story of 7 ignored complaints that she had simply stopped telling because it cost too much to keep being disbelieved. Daniel was there for both meetings. Chief sat in the corner of Estelle's kitchen and did not move until Warren Stoll arrived. He came at 11:30, unannounced, in the way of a man who had learned that arriving unannounced was how you controlled the room. He knocked twice and opened the door without waiting to be invited, and he stood in the kitchen doorway in a jacket and a pleasant expression and looked at the table and the box of legal pads and Patricia Osai's card and recalibrated rapidly, and still managed to arrange his face into something that looked like concern. "Mrs. Marsh," he said, "I heard you'd been having some trouble with the paperwork. I wanted to come by personally." Chief stood up. He moved from the corner to the space between Warren Stoll and the kitchen table in 3 steps, and the sound that came from him was not loud. It was continuous and low and entirely certain, not a warning but a position statement. The growl of a dog that had already decided and was communicating that decision in the clearest possible language. His eyes were on Stoll. His body did not move again. He was simply there, between the man and the table had Estelle Marsh at it, and that was the end of the geometry. Stoll looked at the dog. He took a step to the right to move around him. Chief took a step to the right. Stoll stopped. Patricia Osai said, without looking up from her legal pad, "Mr. Stoll, I'm an attorney representing several plaintiffs in a civil action currently filed in Allegheny County. You are one of the named defendants. I'd advise you not to speak to my clients without your own counsel present." Stoll looked at Daniel. He said, the pleasantness finally leaving his voice, "I don't know who you are, but you have no standing here." Daniel said, "I'm a resident and a guest of Mrs. Marsh. I don't need standing." He took out his phone. He pulled up the state contractor licensing database and turned the screen to face the room. Lakeshore Home Services, license suspended. And Lakeshore Home Improvements, different entity, same registered agent, same address. "You'd like to explain the difference?" Stoll said nothing. Estelle had been watching him from the kitchen table with the expression of a woman who had been waiting a long time to be in a room where she was believed. She did not perform what she felt. She simply sat straight and looked at the man who had taken $14,000 and 14 months of her dignity, and she said, in a voice that did not shake, "I told everyone." Nobody believed me. 6 words. Not an accusation. Not a speech. Just the plain fact, spoken plainly, in a room that was finally in a position to hear it. Warren Stoll's pleasant expression had been gone for some time by then. In its place was the face of a man who understood that the architecture he had built, the 2 company names, the addendum buried in boilerplate, the 7 ignored complaints, the 14 months of closed doors, had not held. Chief watched him, did not move, did not stop. Daniel said, "Detective Vukovich at the Erie PD has your plate from last Tuesday evening on Dunmore Street. Patricia has the cross-filing documentation. The class action currently has 19 plaintiffs. After today, it has 21. He paused. "You should call your attorney." Stoll left. Chief watched him to the door. The growl did not stop until the latch clicked. Then he walked back to the corner of the kitchen, lay down, and put his chin on his paws, and looked at Estelle Marsh with the amber-eyed steadiness of a dog that had done what he came to do and was in no particular hurry about anything else. Estelle looked back at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Good dog." She said it very quietly, like something she had been saving. What happened over the following months moved the way things move when the evidence is thorough and the attorney is prepared. Warren Stoll's 2 company entities were the subject of a joint investigation by the Pennsylvania Attorney General and the Erie County DA. The class action settled with 26 plaintiffs across 3 counties. Estelle's property lien was voided. The $9,000 in loan payments she had made was returned. The remaining principal was discharged. Margaret Tolliver resolved similarly. The Hendersons on the corner, Frank and Rosalie, who had been telling their story for 11 months without being believed, came to the community center meeting the legal aid organization hosted in December. Patricia Osai spoke. Daniel sat in the back. Chief was petted by 11 different people over the course of the evening and assessed each one before accepting. The center director, a woman named Carmen, posted a notice in the front window the following week. Seniors, if someone has taken advantage of you, you will be believed here. Daniel had not suggested it. Carmen had watched the meeting from the back of the room and decided, without being asked, that her building was going to be different. There are moments that feel less like a legal outcome and more like a community deciding what it is going to be. On a Sunday in late November, Estelle Marsh was back in her pew at Greater Zion Baptist Church on State Street for the first time in 8 months. She had stopped going when the loan payments had made her too ashamed to face the people who had known her and Charles together. The choir director, a man named Robert, who had been deacon with Charles for 11 years, had hugged her at the door for a long time before she went inside. The light through the high windows of Greater Zion on a clear November morning has a particular quality, warm and lateral, and very still. And Estelle sat in it and did not think about contracts or license numbers or court filings. She thought about Charles, and about the coffee cup she put away empty every morning, and about the words she still remembered writing on 31 years of students' desks on the first day of school. Her word, she told Daniel later, over coffee at her kitchen table with Chief asleep on the floor between them, had always been the same one every year. She had written it on every desk for every child because she believed it was the thing that mattered most and the thing that was hardest to hold on to. Persist. Daniel had been reading case files for 2 years. He had been a Marine for 8 before that. He had learned, in both roles, and in neither one exclusively, that the world did not run short of people willing to take from those who could not easily fight back. What it ran short of was people who believed the ones fighting back and stood close enough to matter. Chief had known, on a cold, eerie morning, before Daniel had seen anything except a woman being turned away at a door. Chief had stopped walking, and Daniel had learned, a long time ago in a different kind of conflict, that when Chief stopped walking, you found out why. He had simply stopped with him. That was where all of it began. In 4 planted paws, and a sound that was information rather than noise. And a Marine who had learned, over years and across distances, the only rule that had never failed him. When your dog tells you something is wrong, you do not keep walking. This story is for every person who told the truth and was not believed. And for every person who believed them anyway and stayed. Is there an Estelle in your life? Someone who fought back alone for longer than they should have had to? Who kept the documents and filed the forms and was told no until they almost stopped asking? Tell me about them in the comments. Let this section be full of people who deserved a witness and finally have one. Every story on this channel is about choosing not to look away. If that matters to you, subscribe, so you're here for the next one. There are more stories that deserve to be told. Which moment in this story stayed with you? I'll see you in the comments.